It's 25 minutes away from 9 and it's time for the Friday Forum this morning. Joining us to discuss some of the issues of the week, Amanda Spalding, a management consultant, president of Orange Ratepayers and Orange Residents and Ratepayers Association and a mayoral candidate for Orange. And she joins me in the studio this morning. Morning, Amanda.
Morning.
Bob the Bushie McFarland, a retired grazier and rural advocate. He's also in the studio with me. Hi, Bob.
G'day.
Nice to have you. Very, very well. And via the wonders of technology, Mathew Dickerson, a businessman, technologist and the former mayor of Dubbo. Morning to you, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning. I'm a bit jealous that Bob gets a "the" after his name.
Would you like one?
Oh, can you come up with something for me?
Nicknames this morning, yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of Bob the Bushie.
By the end of this half an hour, we'll come up with a clever nickname for you.
Thank you.
It's very nice of you all to join us here this morning for the Friday Forum. In a moment, I'll ask you about why there's not more support, I guess, for main streets being dropped to 30 kilometres an hour. But first, let's start with one of the big sort of national debates of the week. A number of prominent voices this week, including the head of Virgin Airlines, the former Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and some government backbenchers have suggested we need to start talking about living with COVID-19. They argue it's not realistic to protect ourselves forever by keeping borders closed and preventing overseas travel. Instead, they say we must do what we can to vaccinate as many people as possible and then learn to live with the virus, even if that means more people will get sick and die. The Prime Minister, though, says Australians want a more cautious approach of keeping international borders closed until everyone is safe. Who's reading the room correctly? Amanda Spalding.
Look, I think we do have to learn to live with the virus because I think, there'll be others as well. There will be other pandemics in future and we have to learn how to deal with this. I remember years ago, in my life in local government when we often wrote business continuity plans and we were thinking of pandemics 10, 12 years ago. So it's really something we should have learned how to live with. But, of course, one death is always one death too many for the people involved. And I think that the chief exec of Virgin Airlines has apologised for what she said because I think it was considered a bit rough. I didn't actually hear it. But
doesn't mean she doesn't believe it, though.
No, I know. But, look, my aunt died at the age of 96 in May in Queensland, and I was so relieved that her daughter was able to be there in the aged care home with her for the week before she died, and it was a good death. And I think those are things we need to take into consideration. The people who were kind of locked out of Western Sydney aged care homes, I think that was terribly sad. So I think you have to work out how to find the right balance, but I do think vaccinate and live with it.
Okay, Mathew Dickerson, there's no denying that this idea of keeping borders closed has proved very politically popular for political leaders so far, and obviously the Prime Minister thinks that that's where the majority of the population are lying. Do you think he's right?
Well, I actually take a slightly different angle here, Ewan. What I find really intriguing during the whole COVID process is that we have about 18,000 people a year die from heart disease, about 9,000 people a year die from lung cancer. Governments are happy to keep selling cigarettes to all of us. They're happy to keep selling sugary drinks and lollies. And yet we have all these people die. I mean, 27,000 from those two things alone. So we kind of all of a sudden with COVID said, oh no, we can't accept a single death. We've got to keep everyone separated, stop international travel. A whole range of things have occurred from COVID. And I actually agree with the approach we've generally taken. What I get confused about is why are we happy to accept, say, for example, 27,000 deaths? Imagine how many deaths we could save by stopping the sale of cigarettes tomorrow. So you kind of go on one hand, yeah, we'll accept those 9,000 deaths, but COVID, we can't accept one single death. I actually think we should open up international borders, but from a technology background, I think what we should be doing, we've talked about some sort of digital vaccine passport, if you like. If you want to go and travel internationally, get your digital passport stamped with the fact that you've been vaccinated. And if you want to travel, vaccination's compulsory. So if you don't believe in the vaccination, don't want it, well, you probably miss out on a little bit. So I think we can. I think we're at the point now we've gone far enough down the track. We could travel, but just make sure you're vaccinated before you travel.
Yeah. Bob McFarland, I know you're hesitant to get vaccinated against COVID-19. If they opened up the borders, that would put you at risk of catching the virus and becoming unwell. Are you siding with the Prime Minister then on wanting to keep the borders shut for as long as possible?
No, I'm a bit like Amanda and Matthew. I've got a different tilt on all of this, Ewan. I believe that I've got a very strong faith. I'm a born-again Christian. I believe that God and Christ is bigger than all this, and that we're fiddling while Rome burns. And I do believe in this situation, viruses come and go, everything come and go, and I agree that we're going to have to learn to live with it. But I think the first thing, and I've got a bit of conduit in here.
I've noticed.
And I took this
it's
to
the
church.
first time we've ever had props on the forum. But,
Well, it's a bit of inch poly.
I did tell you it was radio, didn't I?
But the message is, I want to show you, because I'm the conduit between people and Christ.
Right.
In other words, if you've got a problem, pray, pray, pray. And if you want to know more, contact me and I'll take you to Christ. I'm not physically doing it, but spiritually I'll pray. And I think that a lot of this is we've got to do it more spiritually. We've got to do it with prayer. And I do believe that Christ can overcome everything. He would crucify.
Okay, so if we open the international borders tomorrow, you catch COVID-19 and you end up on a respirator at the Orange Base Hospital, that is God's will.
No, it won't happen. I'm absolutely confirmed it won't happen, Ewan, because what I've taken in my life is guidance from the Lord. I'm living with nature. I'm going to build up my immune system. I'm taking nutrients. I'm taking about 30 nutritional tablets a day. I believe that I'm building up my stem cells. I'm recovering. All my body is going to be immune to any sort of virus.
There you go.
Through two hands, through nature's products and Christ's intervention in my life.
Wow, there you go. That really was three very different takes this morning on that question. Who knew? It's about 18 minutes away from 9 on ABC Central Western Plains. You're listening this morning to the Friday Forum. Bob the Bushie McFarland, a retired grazier, rural advocate. Mathew Dickerson, still coming up with a nickname for him. He's a businessman, a technologist and the former mayor of Dubbo. And Amanda Spalding is the president of the Orange Residents and Ratepayers Association, as well as a mayoral candidate this year for Orange City Council. On to our next question this morning. It's a council style question, I guess. Many local councils around the world at the moment are cutting speed limits in high pedestrian areas. 5 Australian states and territories are trialling or planning 30 kilometre per hour speed limits in zones. Some regional centres are also introducing a 40 kilometre limit for all residential areas. The evidence does say that dropping speed limits to 40 or even 30 k's an hour will save lives. It may even encourage us to walk more, which could invigorate main streets. So why shouldn't we be racing to do the same? Mathew Dickerson.
Yeah, thanks for throwing straight to me, Ewan, on this tricky one. The really interesting part here with this, Ewan, is that you can drop speed limits as much as you like, change road laws. The problem is that the people who are most likely to actually have some transgressions, cause accidents, are probably the people who ignore some of these laws. So you could put a 20k speed limit in, and there are some people, and can I use the word tosser on radio, that might be tossers that go screaming down main streets that just are driving at inappropriate speed. So drop the speed limit as much as you like, and the sensible people who are probably already driving at those lower speed limits anyway in build-up areas are probably going to keep driving at normal, sensible speed limits. The tossers are probably going to keep speeding down those areas and still possibly cause some accidents. But the big thing you've got hanging over your head these days is points on your licence. So it might have a bit of an impact on some of those people who are likely to speed. But a couple of things from this, Ewan. One is that I'm an avid cyclist, so I love the idea that the speed limit gets so low that you might be better off, you mentioned walking, but you're probably better off riding to work, for example, rather than getting in your car. I also drive, I've got a couple of different electric vehicles, and one of the things that's interesting about those is that as you're driving through your main street, you'll often see people step out off the footpath almost into the road of your car because they can't hear the car coming along. So lower speed limits in those congested areas probably lends itself with EVs because you just don't want to have those pedestrians walk out. You could be driving along innocently and suddenly there's a pedestrian in front of you because they just don't hear the car. So I think we will get that way anyway. We will drop those speed limits. And again, it's a bit like the COVID question, one death is too many. So if we drop those speed limits and it saves one person, then that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. Bob McFarland, why are we so anti-dropping speed limits around here?
Oh, there's a number of reasons, I think, Ewan. Number one is the cars that are built today are beautiful cars. They're miles ahead of what I ever anticipated being able to drive. They've got all the technology under the sun. The problem is to drive a car any distance at 40 kilometres an hour, it's choking up. It just can't. It's not made to go at 40 kilometres an hour. But I'm not anti it. I think it's a good concept to have. I wouldn't go to 30 because you might as well walk. I'd go to.
I think that's the argument.
I'd go to. But a lot of people can't walk. I couldn't walk the distance I need to get to travel from here to my home. And I think 30 is over the top, but I think 40 is. And I do it around schools, and I admire it because kiddies, you don't know what one kiddie's going to do to the next. They jump out from behind cars. They don't know what the problem is. The other thing is, though, I think one of the issues, and Amanda, I'd like to hear Amanda's views on this, but one of the problems we're faced with today is costs, and the council's not out of this in the fact that it's could be a great money revenue for people like the councils and the authorities that are trying to run the country, and we're getting burdened with more costs of penalties.
Okay, well, Amanda Spalding, it is a 30 k's an hour up and down, say, the Orange Main Street would be a long way from one end to the other, but it might help reinvigorate some of our main streets.
Look, I completely support the future city that Orange City Council's pursuing, and they have decided to put the speed limit down to 40 in the CBD, and for those kind of reasons, that it's, more walkable. I have to say that, driving around Orange CBD, I think it is dangerous for pedestrians at the moment because there is a lot of roads where you've got 2 lanes of traffic coming into a roundabout. I will frequently stop to let a pedestrian cross, but the people inside me, the cars inside me, don't. So I make it dangerous for that pedestrian. So, look, they in a lot of places like Byng Street and Lord's Place, the council are taking it down to 1 lane. So, look, for the CBD, I think pedestrian safety is paramount.
Okay.
I think that in residential streets, not so much. A lot of places have 50, and that I think is probably
It used to be
fine.
60.
Yeah, look, I think 50 is better, and people should, be more be more safe in residential areas. But the other thing that Bob was asking about, I think the revenues don't come to council. I think revenues from
The state government.
Yeah, it goes to state government.
Yeah, but it's still a revenue out of those people. A lot of them can't afford it.
Yeah.
It goes into the government revenue, whether it be state, federal, or council, and that costs that we and tolls.
Just don't speed, Bob. You'll be fine. Just don't speed. You'll be
know.
fine. Yeah. You will be
That's a
fine.
terrible.
So Ewan,
It's 13 minutes away from 9. Oh, sorry, Matthew.
yeah, just to back up one thing that Bob said there, one thing that I would actually go for would be a higher speed limit out on some of the highways, because exactly as Bob said, the cars now, compared to, well, I remember the car that I learned to drive in, you had to learn to put your foot on or off the brake if the wheels started skidding. Well, you don't have that problem anymore with ABS. The cars are so much safer. So maybe some 120k speed limits out on some of our good highways compared to 100, 110 now makes travel faster between cities, and then the slower speed limit to make it safer in CBDs. Maybe there's an argument there.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it would feel like an age going from 120 down to 30 through the main streets as you're travelling around, wouldn't it?
It would.
12 minutes away from 9 on ABC Central West and Western Plains. Moving on this morning, if you thought the process of becoming Prime Minister in this country was a bit complicated, just wait till you find out how you become the Mayor. Later this year, we all get to go to the polls to vote for our next local councillors. But in our region, only Orange ratepayers will be allowed to have a direct say on who their Mayor is. All our other local councils will leave it up to their elected councillors to choose. Both systems have their pros and cons, but which should get the best results? Should we leave it up to our elected officials, or should it be a popularity contest? I'm going to start with you, Bob, as the only person who doesn't have a dog in this fight, I guess.
No, I don't. But I've been a ratepayer all my life. I've been not a councillor, but I've been involved in a lot of community committees and organisations, and I found that if you let the general public have a say, who knows what you might get as the mayor. I believe that mayors should be elected by the people that the people elect in there. If they can't find someone good enough in the mayoral job, why open it up the door? Because you only get confusion, and they might elect someone that doesn't really get on with council. I think it's imperative that, the Prime Minister gets elected by the Cabinet. He doesn't get elected by the general public. The United States is the only one, and look at the mess they're in.
Okay. Mathew Dickerson.
Yeah, like
former Mayor of Dubbo.
I'm the same as Bob, and I actually preferred the system we used to have. It's changed now, where if the mayor was elected by the group of councillors, the mayoral election came up every year. So that means that every year you had to put your hand up, and I did it 5 years in a row, where I had to put my hand up and say to my fellow councillors, please elect me. You don't really get the chance to do the wrong thing in council for very long before you're quickly booted out of there. So you're answerable to the group of councillors who are answerable to the community. And exactly as Bob said, the Premier, the Prime Minister, we don't elect those. They're elected by their party. And it's even worse in those situations because the Premier or Prime Minister, as we've seen in particular with the Prime Minister in recent years, might only have the job for a very short period of time. At least the Mayor had it for a year. They've now changed it so it's a 2-year term in that sort of election process. But it means you're the leader of the group of councillors who are ultimately in charge. When you have the mayoral election, which you mentioned Amanda is going for this year in Orange, it's elected by the people. You could have, and this won't happen with Amanda, of course, but you could have someone elected who was incredibly unpopular with the group of councillors, but they're the mayor, and they're the mayor for 4 years. So you're stuck with them for 4 years. Section 234 of the Local Government Act has very few ways to get rid of a councillor or mayor. You've got to be bankrupt or you've got to die. You can't just go, well, they're not really that good, so we'll get rid of them. That's not part of the process. So you're stuck with them for 4 years. So I really think the mayor should be elected. And there's only 35 councils, I think, around the state who actually do the direct election of mayor. The other 93 do it via the council, and I think that's probably the better way to go.
Okay, Amanda Spalding, there is this argument, I guess, that by directly voting for who you want to be mayor, the majority of the population gets who they want, I guess.
Yes, I am the only person who's so far put their hand up to be Mayor of Orange, so if I'm the only one, then we don't need
Stephen
an election.
Bradbury.
but not like Stephen Bradbury, just very popular. But look, I've been involved in local government reforms in New South Wales over 20 years, and I have to say I don't actually agree with the popular election of mayors. I have worked in councils that have a popularly elected mayor. I think that it's kind of... it doesn't quite work with the New South Wales system, if you see what I mean. One of the things,
Australian system, really.
Or the Australian system, yeah. Look, and it doesn't really work in the English system either. So one of the things is that over recent years, the mayor has become more and more of a leader. So in the changes, recent changes to the Local Government Act, the mayor has some specific things he or she has to do, and gets paid an awful lot more than the councillors. So I think that you do have to be clear that the mayor has leadership qualities. But if you end up with a mayor, it'll be 3 years this next time, but if you end up with a mayor who doesn't have the numbers on the floor of the council, you end up with a huge mess. And that's happened in a lot of places like North Sydney. It did happen in Liverpool for a while. You end up with a complete stalemate and going nowhere. So I am not actually in favour of it, but I am standing.
Okay. Can you see any of the benefits?
Look, one of the things is that, I write for Orange City Life about the council game. And one of the things we try to do is to get people more interested and involved in what councils do. Whereas I think a lot of the time people turn up for council elections and just vote by name recognition. Whereas we're trying a lot harder to actually get people to understand what the issues are and what people are actually standing for. So, you may get better diversity. We don't have very good diversity at the moment on many of our local councils around here. So you may get better diversity through popular election, but that's by no means certain.
I think Ewan, probably the one advantage I would say I'm not in favour of, but you would get stability. Yeah. You would have the same mayor for the entire term of council. Amanda's right, this term's 3 years, but normally it's a 4-year term. So you've got that stability, but you can, exactly as Amanda said, end up with a lame duck mayor who every time that person goes to a council meeting, anything he brings forward or he or she brings forward gets defeated on the floor, and then between council meetings they've got to make decisions on behalf of council. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is indeed, and no doubt there'll be more to say about that in the lead up. What are we, 100 days or so?
106 days, I think it is.
106 is
Correct,
Matthew.
Who's
Mathew
counting?
Dickerson is with us this morning, the former Mayor of Dubbo, businessman and technologist. Bob the Bushie McFarland, a retired grazier and rural advocate, and Amanda Spalding, a management consultant, president of the Orange Residents and Ratepayers Association, and yes, the mayoral candidate, the only one at the moment for Orange a little later on this year. This week is Volunteer Week. Far from a celebration of volunteers, though, new research out from the ANU suggests there are 2.1 million less volunteers in Australia now than there were in 2019. The pandemic, of course, can be blamed for much of that. But some say volunteering has also become more complicated and difficult in recent years too. The time required, the red tape, and some of the personalities involved have all been noted as other reasons people feel less like helping others these days. Do you think there are good reasons for fewer volunteers at the moment, or is it simply we don't like giving up our time as much as we used to? I might start with you, Amanda.
Bob and I were having a chat about Hay on the way in because we both got experience of living in Hay. And Hay is a place where there's a massive volunteer effort. And without those volunteers, the place wouldn't run. But the problem is that I think that sometimes organisations end up expecting that, that there is an expectation. So the pandemic, I think, has given people the opportunity to move away from it when they've really wanted to, rather than feeling guilty about it.
Yeah.
Because, I have a friend in Hay who's 76 now, I think, and she frequently drives 3 patients from Hay to Griffith for medical appointments, and that's a 2-hour trip each way, and it's then to take them all around Griffith to their medical appointments. And to me, that's too much to ask for people to do. So I do think that we need to re-look at some of the things. I think there's over 300 volunteers at our hospital, and I look at youth unemployment and I go, actually, perhaps we could create some jobs for young people at the hospital, in the cafe or something, instead of using volunteers. So, or a mixture.
Yeah.
So look, I think that we may sometimes, rely a bit too much, and people may end up feeling guilty. And so maybe the pandemic has in fact given people the opportunity to move away from stuff that they were finding too much.
Yeah. Bob, what do you think?
The problem, I believe, is that the baby boomers are now the elderly of this country, and probably of the world for that matter, and we are now suffering the fact that these people, as Amanda said, are all getting older. I think this lady, she said 70, and they expect her to do all that for nothing and everything. I do believe in wonderful people like Can Assist. Now, Can Assist, they don't expect people to do for nothing, and they raise money to give for people who have cancer problems, need to go to Wagga or Griffith or wherever they need. And I got assistance when my late wife died in Melbourne. They were wonderful. The Salvation Army were wonderful, but you can't get something for nothing, and you're going to run out of puff. And the country can't rely on volunteers for the rest of their day. And you've got to reward people for effort. And I don't care what age they are or who they are or where they are and when they are, they've got to get reward for effort.
Okay. Mathew Dickerson, just quickly.
Very quickly, I think we can blame solicitors in America for the problem we've got. There's so much regulation now because people are concerned about being sued. For example, my Rotary Club, we have youth exchange students come through regularly, but now we've got all the WWC checks and the W3 forms that have all got to be completed, and it just gets to the point where you go, gee, it's so hard just to try and volunteer. If you want to go and pick up rubbish along the river on a weekend, here, sign this disclaimer because you might sue if you fall over and cut your leg. So it just gets to the point, I think, sometimes where people say, you know what, it's so hard to be a volunteer and give some of my time up. Oh, I couldn't be bothered. I'll sit at home and watch telly. So I think that's part of the problem. It's just become harder and harder to become a volunteer.
Yeah, some furious nodding going on in the studio this morning here, Matthew. Mathew Dickerson, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
Matthew Dickerson, a businessman, a technologist, and the former Mayor of Dubbo there this morning, joining us from Dubbo. Amanda Spalding, thank you very much to you for this morning. Amanda Spalding, a management consultant, president of Orange Residents and Ratepayers Association, and a mayoral candidate for Orange this year. And Bob the Bushie McFarland, thank you very much for coming in this morning. It's been lovely to have you in the studio as well.
Thank you. And just to clarify a thing, my email is bobthebushie@gmail. Now, Gmail...
We're going to run out of time, Bob.
Not AU, but Gmail, it's God's mail.
Okay. All right.
and AU's not there because I want to spread the West right around the world.
Fair enough. Bob the Bushie McFarland, a retired grazier and rural advocate with the final word this morning. It's time for the news. It's 9 o'clock.